Thank you to Bidding Classics for sponsoring today's video. Check out this online auction for classic cars with no buyer's fees.
Hello everybody, welcome to number 27. I'm Jack and today I am here with this quite rare manual 928 S4. Now today the 911 is venerated as the real sort of all-round pure sports car. But in the late 60s and early 70s things were rather different. Porsche was ashamed about the quite archaic layout that the 911 had. Rear-engined, air-cooled, torsion bar suspension. And it decided that that design had been pushed and evolved as far as it could go. They picked a luxury GT Tourer as the car to replace it, which would have a wider appeal. And when it first came out, the 928 had a really good reception. It was the first and only car that ever won the European Car of the Year award. Whatever you think of that award, the fact that it's the only sports car to ever get it is quite significant. It was a very forward-thinking design. It's quite smooth in terms of the bodywork instead of having the knobbly bits that most of the other sort of sports cars had at the time. It was luxurious, it was technologically quite advanced as well. It had a transaxle at the rear for perfect weight distribution. But the 928 commercially was a bit of a failure. Porsche, however, was quite wedded to this design. I mean, just look at this lovely shark nose. And it took them a long time to accept that the 928 was not going to be able to replace the 911. So in the mid-80s, they started to develop the 911 all over again. And this poor car suffered the indignity of being outlived by the car it was due to replace. In terms of the design, Porsche absolutely ticked all the boxes. It's a brilliant GT, it was futuristic, it definitely looked like it was the way ahead. It's a great car to drive, as we'll see when I take it out, and yet it wasn't able to replace by the 911, it was outlived by it. Why is it that a car which was so old in terms of tech and design was able to outlive this? I think there's three key reasons for that. I'm going to tell you more about that and how it drives when I take it out. Now, the fantastic thing about this car is that it is Paul, who brought it up, is absolutely not precious with it. He really makes use of it. And you can see he's been all over Europe with it. He regularly goes to the Nuremberg ring. He goes on track days. Now, I wouldn't think that this is naturally an automatic choice for a track day, but he says it's pretty good. The only thing going against it is the weight. I thought they would have been a bit too soft, but he says it's okay. He bought it in 2003 or 2002, I think. And after only a few months of ownership, the belt snapped and he had to rebuild the heads in his driveway in winter. I think that took about 5 months for him to get it back on the road. So this is an S4, which is one of the later versions. It had more power, 315, 320 horsepower. It had different, more aerodynamic aprons, or bumpers rather than aprons, different design wheels. This particular car has the even later wheel design, which I think really suits it, but some people do like the old manhole cover wheels as well, and I think they're both pretty good. I think these do suit it a little bit better. Only about 10% of the 928 sold in the UK had the 5-speed manual, so it's a bit of a privilege to be able to drive one. It was never really meant, it was never designed to be a sports car, but I think that Porsche were in a little bit of a bind on how to market this, and also got into that familiar trap where you build a GT but you're not quite sure where on the GT spectrum to place it. Now, for a car company like Jaguar, for example, the XJS, it was a no-brainer. That simply had to be as quiet, refined and comfortable as it could possibly be. But with this being a Porsche, that wasn't such an easy choice because Porsche also had to make it handle. Now, they may have been a little bit porky, but it still has plenty of power to play with. And the engine is refined, it's revvy, it's smooth, it's ideal for the purpose of which it was conceived. The ride, I wouldn't call it bad, but certainly it's not what you would expect from a GT. So Autocar at the time were quite unsure where to place the 928 because it didn't really handle as well. It wasn't a sports car in the same vein as the 911, but it also was nowhere near as refined as the XJS. There was too much sort of road noise, and the suspension was a little bit too stiff for that. I think in those days, that proved to be a little bit of a problem. Things were a bit simpler now. You do get GTs which are more sort of firmly sprung, and people have come to accept that. But back in the late 70s and in the 80s, a GT had an expectation of being a bit more of a comfortable car. So Porsche were in quite a difficult position. And it showed, because in the 18-year production run, 65,000 roughly 928s were produced. If you look at just how many 3.2 Carreras were made in a 5-year period, so I think that was 83 to 88, 75,000. So 5 years versus 18 years, it had already surpassed the 928. You'd understand that if it was a bad car, because perhaps it just didn't do what it was set out to do. The thing is, the 928 is a very good car. It's always been a very good car. They have a reputation for being expensive and troublesome, but that is simply because, like all these cars that are expensive, they then become cheap. The people who buy them don't do the maintenance that needs to be done, and they get this reputation for being difficult and unreliable, which just isn't the case. These were brilliant cars. They were very reliable as long as they were looked after. Before I tell you more about how this one drives, I think there's 3 reasons why the 928 failed to replace the 911 and why the 911 was so long-lived. And they have more to do with the 911 than the 928 itself. I think the problem is that the 911, the way Porsche perceived the 911 to have these weaknesses, that it could no longer be developed, it was too different, it wasn't advanced enough, actually played into its favour because there was nothing else like it out there. It was so distinctive in look, in feel, that flat 6 air-cooled engine. It had good enough build quality to be used as a daily car. There was just no other sports car quite like it. So that's the first thing. The old girl can still pick up her skirts and go. So the second thing is that the 911 had a really distinctive silhouette. And it's just so iconic that it's quite a difficult thing to match. And although this was futuristic and the shark nose is pretty iconic, couldn't quite live up to those looks. Lastly, God, you know, this is better than I thought. Lastly, little grimy road, so even in second gear it spins up really easily. But lastly, Porsche, in making this car, moved it up market of the 911. At the same time, the cars that also were supposed to kind of replace the 911 or to offer a sports car experience, the 924 and the 944, they were below the 911 in terms of market segments. So unwittingly, Porsche left a space open for the 911 to breathe. Now, it may be that it's just such an iconic car that it would have done it anyway, that it would have survived anyhow, but I think that the market positioning they had at the time did encourage it to continue to flourish. So for me, those are the three reasons why it just didn't manage to do what it was designed to do and replace the 911. It's not that it's not a good car, far from it. And I'm going to tell you more. This is a well-used example, and I think Paul does what he needs to do to keep it on the road, to keep it mechanically sound. But it is well used, 244,000 miles. And it still is amazing. The ride for a GT isn't quite good enough. Now, he replaced the dampers with some B6s, but they're still fast road dampers. I think the originals, I've been in others, they're maybe a tiny bit softer. But it still drives so well. And I'm blown away all over again, because I was interested today in doing this video because I really wanted to get to the bottom of why hasn't this car been a success against the 911, but really unexpectedly, I love the way it drives. You can feel it's a heavy thing, but the steering has precision. It's got lots of feedback, and even from the straight ahead, as soon as it tucks into the corner, it feels really well balanced. It's precise. You don't really think a car of this size and this weight would drive like this. The driving position is really comfortable. You've got an interior which has the old world Porsche charm. It's well built, it's simple, everything is to hand. You know what, these are really brilliant cars. You get so much feedback from the front of the car and the back of the car as well. Something that modern cars just don't do. Now, there is an argument to say, and modern Porsche engineers will say of the 911s, that it's not true that you don't get as much feedback. It's just that they filter out what you don't need, and you only get what you need to know what the car is doing. And there is some truth in that. But there is also some truth in saying that when a car offers you this much information, even if a lot of it is redundant in terms of having to know exactly what the car is doing, it's still a pleasure to know that and to get that information. So this is a very, very good old school car in exactly that way. I think it's a shame that the 968, it's a real shame. If I said 968 before, just ignore me. It's a real shame that the 928 didn't have the commercial success that I think it should have had. But the story doesn't quite end here, because although it was never officially replaced, things changed a lot in the Porsche lineup, and it's also because of this car. First of all, the current 911 has become much more like the 928 than it ever was before. They're still able to excite, but they're also much more comfortable. They're much closer to a GT, I think, than the original 911s, especially in the standard format. Not talking about GT3s and the like, although they're also very usable. But also, Porsche have since developed a whole range of GT cars. If you look at the Cayenne, the Macan, the Panamera, they all definitely have influences from what Porsche did with this. Also, the 911 itself now has a real, more focused sports car underneath it. Thank you all so much for watching. I've really enjoyed this today. Big thumbs up for the 928. I really look forward to seeing you for the next video. If you have a car that you would like me to do a story on, to review, please get in touch. I love all the stuff from the sort of 60s, 70s, 80s, even 90s. I like Italian stuff, French stuff, anything quirky really works for me. Thank you all again, and see you for the next video.